Hello, everyone, and welcome to Game Brigade. I am Brian Greer, and today we're taking a look at Lords of Ragnarok by Awaken Realms. So, I intend to make this video as condensed and informative as possible, talking about my experience so far with this prototype, because as of the time of this recording and uploading, there's probably about 5 or 6 days left in the campaign. So I want to give you guys as much information that I possibly can from my experience to make a better decision if you are considering backing this game. So right off the bat, I should have you guys know that I obviously played with a prototype here. So the rules were prototype, and it's still a work in progress. So what my experiences have been were or might not be what will be like the final end product per se. And also the rules that I played with were changing as every day would go on. They'd send updates or make changes. So things can be different. So I just want to make sure that there's a disclaimer with that. But with that, let's talk about my experiences with this game and where I feel I would be right now. So I have made a video on this for the breakdown. If you're looking for more of a breakdown in terms of the actual rules and how the game works, I recommend you checking that video. I'll put a link up here for you for ease. But this game I've played several times. I played it with the nice people over at How It Plays. If you haven't seen their channel, I recommend checking it out. That was a 3-player playthrough. We played kind of interestingly way by having me kind of Skype or Zoom in, which is kind of an interesting way to play it. And by doing so, we were able to get a good experience though for the 3-player. And I've also played this at home now with my own player group. Lords of Ragnarok is a area control game at its heart, but it really implements the war game mentality by allowing players to have combat and trying to encourage conflict. I feel like there is a hard balance when you're trying to integrate between wargaming and area control. In an area control game, combat kind of has an idea that it should be important, but it's not as important as it is in terms of controlling territories or specific resources. And I do believe that that is at its core very important in Lords of Ragnarok. Players are going to want to be controlling the settlements, the temples, most importantly, as well as the rune forges, which are located here throughout the map, to be able to get resources and benefits throughout the game. Most importantly, I think the temples and then settlements are going to be kind of the crucial points, because temples allow you to gain more access with priests and could be a win condition at one point, and settlements allow you to increase your army value if you choose to use them in that manner. So I do think area control at its core is what this game feels like. But I always, myself, and I will say this kind of as a disclaimer, whenever I play a game that has dudes on a map, and when I say dudes on a map, it means I have army figures or something that represents my army or my faction, and there is conflict occurring on the board, I always look at these games as a war game, and I want to take territory by using my military to push across. I want to create borders, a standard war game. And these games generally don't play well with that kind of mindset. So I always have to tell myself to try not to play that way. But I did find that Lords of Ragnarok did allow me to use that kind of strategies at times to play more aggressively with my combat than other games have been in the same genre. So that is something to take note, that in terms of the gameplay aspect, the combat felt more rewarding, not as rewarding as other games have been. And that is probably because the game utilizes combat cards to complete its combat. I will admit that I like the randomness of dice rolling. I like the idea that a player could be undermatched or underdog in a conflict and still have the ability to win or eke out a victory or a fire victory. You know, making it so punishing for your opponent that they might have won, but it might not have been worth it. Or maybe you can retake your territory from that. This game, because of the way combat is introduced and the way that it doesn't allow you to really be as punished in terms of how you reduce your army strength and you retreat, I don't get that experience as often. The combat is also pretty well determined once combat has begun, because the defender will play a combat card and you get to see the type of combat card they're playing as well as their combat strength, and then the attacker gets to play one, and they can go back and forth until either both players have played all their cards or one player chooses to pass. And in that point, it's pretty obvious, we all know who's going to win. So I don't necessarily like that aspect, but because the combat is not as punishing as other games could potentially be, it at least encourages the players to engage in combat. I find that when combat can be too difficult or too punishing for certain players, they will reject the idea completely and play a pacifist game as much as possible. In a game like this, where territory control matters, being pacifist can really hinder your experience. So there is a fine balance that they're playing with in terms of allowing a player to attack and having some satisfaction with that, but also not making it so punishing that other players feel like they're completely out of the game when they lose a combat or engage in combat. The other aspect that I think is really interesting about this game is that not only is it focusing on the area control and the wargaming aspect, there is a secondary spot with these monsters that we have portrayed here, the miniature monsters, these large minis, the medium-sized minis, actually, I would say. There is an ability where a player can choose to hunt these to go for the win, and eventually killing Loki, who is sitting here in his throne, as their win condition. So they could choose to ignore the aspects of the area control and the conflict with the other players and say, I'm just going to use my hero to attack the miniatures, the monsters. And I do think that's an interesting take, because it gives players who do enjoy to play a pacifist role or play a more cooperative role, you know, in a game like this, competitiveness is kind of a key feature. It does give those players who are less competitive or less combative an avenue to still play the game the way it's intended to be played and have an opportunity to win. To do so, players would have to engage with one of these monsters by doing the monster action here in the middle, and then having to play cards to match the monster symbols over here. Now, this is difficult, and it takes some time to increase your hero's strength, and that is a part of this game, is increasing your hero, choosing the path that you want to take. In the center, or actually not the center, in the outskirts here, we have three different gods. We have Thor, Odin, and Freya. Each one of these gods can be prayed to increase stats that are referenced basically with what they do. Freya will increase your wisdom, allowing you to control more cards in your hand, as well as allowing you to have more rune tokens to take additional turns or actions on your turn. Thor will increase your might, allowing you to be more powerful, but Odin will increase your authority, allowing you to have stronger army units when you recruit them. So depending on the strategy you want to do, each one of these gods can be used to increase that specific part. And I do like that at the beginning of the game, players can choose the path. But there is a catch-22 or double-edged sword, I would say, with that. If a player has played this game and they haven't fully decided on what path they want to do, if they start on wisdom and then go into authority and then decide they want to also attack monsters, decide to go into might, it can be punishing and less effective. So there is more of a push to have players really kind of decide how they want to play their game from the beginning. And that could be good or bad depending on how you look at it. But in my experience, I felt like players were more successful when they had a plan from the outright of what they're going to do. Either they're going to be killing the monsters or using authority to make their army stronger, or using Freya to have more runes to take additional actions, or use the rune action section to be more efficient. So depending on what your decisions may be. So other than that, there's also additional ways that players can use to augment or enhance their gameplay. On the outskirts of the board, we have these regions that are where players can become allied with additional factions. And these are factions that are not well represented in the game, but I do believe they're going to be representing with better miniatures or some sort of sculpts to give players a better enhancement of, like, this is a region that you can become allied with. And these regions give bonuses based on the actions taken in the middle. If I'm over here and have an ally with this region and someone takes this action, I get the bonus over here, which would be drawing an extra combat card. Of course, I have to make sure I have the ability to hold combat cards, so I must be praying to Freya to have the ability to have a larger hand size. So there's going to be a lot playing with that. I do like that it gives another option for players to enhance or augment their strategies, although I haven't seen a reason that the players that have done the best have actually ignored the allies. So that is something to take note. Although in one of the games I did play, I very much focused on the allies. I wanted to have as many as I could to be as efficient as I possibly could be. And I did end up winning that game. So that, was a good thing there. I do want to talk about some of the abilities. We do have abilities with the allies here. We also have abilities that your heroes can start the game with. It's their story, as well as the abilities that every leader or hero has. And the abilities, I believe, are weaker than I would like to see. I think they are not as powerful as I'd want them to be. But that is something that Awaken Realms has stated is intentional, and that they're going to be changing them and enhancing them and improving them as the game goes on. So I wanted to make sure I brought it up and said that they did feel underwhelming at times or not used as often as I wish they could be used. But they do plan on changing them, hopefully. Now, they might not change them at all, and then you have to decide if those powers are going to be as fun, because one of the reasons I enjoy playing these games is for powers and abilities, to be able to feel like I am doing something impactful on the board that no one else is able to do. And other people can do the same. They can use their hero and be impactful and do something that is a combo, or using their hero in a way that I can't. I think that's interesting and creates a unique dynamic and makes it so people want to play different heroes or experiment and try different kind of combinations with their heroes. So I'd like to see a little bit more impactful combinations, and especially when you have these stories that you can combine with your hero, I would like to see some interesting combinations interacting between the two. Maybe something happens between them that you don't realize could occur because you have a scenario with two linked up that you haven't played before, and that's a more interesting combination, and I'd like to see more of that. There's also a point where you play these temples out and there's a draft, and those have been powerful, but in widely varying aspects. It's these blessing cards, and some of these blessings can be more impactful than the others. And the player who triggers the draft has the ability to have the first pick. So being able to control the draft is important. But being in a higher player count game, say a 3 or 4 player count game, getting at the end of the run feels pretty weak because the power levels can be very different between the different cards. So I like to see some more balancing within the blessings. I don't mind powerful blessings, but I'd like them to be more refined into allowing us to maybe change the dictation of our strategies or push us in a way that we want to maybe influence us in a different direction. Give us the ability to use the blessings to augment our current strategy, or even completely alter my current strategy. Maybe there's something so good that it combines with my hero that now I'm going to change my original plan and follow this because of the current blessing. I'd like to see something like that. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that it has to change or it will, but that is personally something I would have loved to have seen. The final thing I think I'm going to talk about, because I don't want to harp too much on the game, because for the most part I loved it. There's some minor nitpicks that I could throw out there. For example, the minis here, the god minis, I've mentioned this in the breakdown, that for the most part, they're going to be broken down. So, for example, Freya here, she would most likely look maybe something like that, just, you know, her lower body, or maybe at some point just her torso. And and then ending the game, it doesn't seem as impactful. You have these large minis that are so grand and incredible to look at. I want to look at them. And they did mention in one of their updates that they asked if would players like to have some sort of countdown, or maybe something that represents the gods level, and have the gods be fully erect, and then you can maybe do a scroll wheel to say level 1, level 2, level 3. I personally love that, and I might get a dice and place a dice in the front and say, okay, she's level 1, then level 2, because I want to see these gods on the outskirts fully erect personally. Some people like the idea of erecting the monuments, seeing them come across the board, but to me, I want to enjoy the minis, especially because they are the centerpiece of this game and what makes the table presence look as good as it does. So that's a personal nitpick there. Other than that, the overall feeling of the game, the overall flow is great. The only thing I haven't quite enjoyed are the end game triggers. We currently have several ways to end the game: by controlling 5 temples, by controlling 3 full regions, or by triggering Ragnarok. I believe there is one more that I could be easily forgetting. But I don't. Oh, here we go. Win conditions. Let me just read the card. We have control all regions in 3 lands, control 5 regions with temples, or kill 2 monsters and Loki. That's the one I forgot. Kill 2 monsters, which I did talk about earlier, then Loki. And the final one, which is unfortunately the one that triggered more often than not, has been Ragnarok. At the top of the board here, I have 5 cards. And as players play the game, these will fulfill automatically. It's kind of like an inevitable timer to stop the game at some point. Players will have to eventually enter a stage of Ragnarok if they cannot complete the other tasks in the set time. And once 3 of those have been completed, then Ragnarok triggers, which becomes a battle for the middle of the board, where players are going to have to try to control the amount of settlements surrounding the center. That becomes a race to the middle. And if players aren't prepared for Ragnarok, or if players aren't prepared for the inevitable push, they could find themselves in a situation where they're already out of the game because other people have controlled the center and made it impossible to take over. That might be part of the game. That's part of being prepared, and part of being aware of your surroundings. But I personally would rather have a game that had a climatic ending in terms of an actual finish. There have been points in the game where the endings have been anticlimactic, and I don't know if that's something you can fix. It might just be the way it is. For example, one of our games ended where a player controlled 5 temples, and he just took control of a temple and said, boom, I win. That's it, game over, I win. And everyone else was like, oh, wow, he does have 5 temples. So things like that can be anticlimactic. I don't think it's a problem of the game, but I just want to make sure you're aware. So that's my quick rundown of Lords of Ragnarok. Would I recommend this game right now? Yes, I did have a lot of fun with this game. I do think there's some nitpicks and changes that I would like to see, but I think the core game at $99 with all the stretch goals seems to be like a pretty good value, and I'm currently backing this. So I'd like to see more of this game. I want to see what they do with it. And right now, this early shell has been very enjoyable. If this review was helpful for you, please remember to leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. I'd appreciate all the support. If you really want to support the channel, consider subscribing to my Patreon. We have a link down there. Even $1 greatly supports the channel. If you can't do that, you can always leave a like. It helps the channel. And I'll also recommend my channel to you on YouTube. So if there's something that maybe YouTube thinks might be out your alley, then YouTube will recommend it to you. So remember, click the like button for those recommendations. Otherwise, I appreciate you all watching the show. Check out the Discord as well. I'd love to have you part of the community. I will talk to you all very soon. Bye.